born in California. Now I live in New York. And between Superstorm Sandy here and the raging wildfires and the record droughts there, it's impossible to ignore global warming. It worries me a lot. So when I get a chance to meet a top energy executive whose company burns a lot of coal, oil, and gas, I'm eager to ask him some tough questions.
The single largest source of carbon emissions in the United States, in the world, comes from power plants. And we own power plants.
David Crane is the CEO of America's second largest energy generation company, NRG. When it comes to climate change and carbon emissions, so many people would say you're the bad guy.
We make enough power to light up 40 million American homes. But in order to do that, right now, we're emitting about 60 million tons of carbon into the atmosphere a year. We're the bad guy because we're keeping the lights on in everyone's home. And this is the way the lights have been kept on for the last 100 years. And so.
But then he tells me something I wasn't expecting. He's trying to move away from oil and coal, and as quickly as possible. In Texas, his company is already one of the biggest providers of wind energy. So then is your interest in sustainable energy purely personal and moral, or do you see, does it make business sense?
Oh no, it makes total business sense. You know, when we started, we sort of looked around to our left and to our right, thinking that, you know, ours is a pretty competitive industry where all our competitors are gonna be there and we have to fight them. And we were alone.
Why?
You know, I don't know. I can't ask that question.
And David Crane isn't the only surprising person who's pushing for clean energy these days. About an hour from where I grew up, I meet the mayor of Lancaster, California, a tough-on-crime Republican who's trying to power his entire city with solar energy.
Half the people think I'm nuts when I say these things. Half the people believe me, and then it happens. You know, nobody believed 97% of the city buildings would be net zero.
Explain, what is net zero?
Net zero is we are not creating a carbon footprint at all. That's attainable now.
And it's not just companies and cities that are turning to renewables. Entire countries are too.
People have been talking about solar and wind since the 1970s when, Jimmy Carter was talking about this stuff. So it's been around for a while. But what's different now is that you've got Germany, Japan, Denmark, really large, sophisticated economies that are now sprinting towards renewable energy because we're cost effective, we create huge amount of jobs, we're local, so you don't have to worry about importing foreign oil or doing all of those things.
So what's stopping our country from doing the same thing? Renewable energy seems to be more viable than ever. But I'm also learning there are some powerful forces standing in its way.
Our planet is changing in ways that will have profound impacts on all of humankind. I'm here to say we need to act.
On a hot day last summer, the president laid out a new, more aggressive plan to rein in climate change.
These are facts.
Obama claimed to see a path forward from the dirty energy of the past to the clean energy of the future. But the energy source the president talked about the most wasn't wind or solar or even nuclear. It was natural gas.
We're also producing more cleaner burning natural gas than any other country on Earth.
He called it clean, affordable, and critical to stopping global warming.
It can also help reduce our carbon emissions.
These days, a lot of people are saying that natural gas is the solution to both our energy and climate woes. But I discovered that a handful of scientists have some problems with that claim, including one who used to work for the gas industry.
The industry really wants the American people to believe. They really want the President of the United States to believe. They want all the state regulators and state legislators to believe what they're saying, which is shale gas is our savior. Merry Christmas, America. It's going to make us energy independent, energy secure. It's going to keep prices low. It's going to kill coal. Well, all those things depend upon shale gas being clean. And we questioned that.
that the greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. The amounts of snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen, and the concentrations of greenhouse gases have...
There's no more fire season. We have wildfires all year round.
Climate change, extreme weather, call it what you will, and our vulnerability to it.
Well, 12 years of drought has left the landscape bone dry.
We got any patriots in the crowd?
A new scientific report has determined the last decade was the warmest on record.
Our world is changing faster and more dramatically than ever before.
When I started looking into the state of clean energy in America, everyone told me to go to Kansas. To the Native Americans who once lived here, Kansas means people of the South Wind. They say that in some parts of the state, it never stops blowing. Today, more and more people in Kansas are trying to harness that natural resource.
Wow.
Look at that. It's huge. I'm here to meet with one of the pioneers, a rancher named Pete Farrell.
I used to cuss the wind. There were days I'd come in with a headache from having to clamp my hat on so tight over my head.
So at what point did your relationship to the wind change?
It was out of strategic necessity. I realized a number of years ago that I was going to join the Old Dead Ranchers Society. That's where you work 24/7, 365 days a year until you fall over dead. And then a bunch of people gather around and congratulate you for what a fine job you did. Yeah, boy, he put away the hours, didn't he? And I've seen guys just work themselves into the grave, and I decided I didn't want to be a member of that society. I wanted to find a different way.
But when he first put up these turbines, he had no idea they would end up saving his ranch when disaster struck.
The worst drought in decades is causing pain across more than half the nation.
Today, the U.S. Department of Agriculture reports almost half of all the nation's counties have been declared disasters because of this year's drought.
We've had droughts before. We could measure them in months. So the first time in my life that I got to experience a 3-year drought. And a drought is like a piece of sand you can never get out of your eye. It's always there. It always reminds you every day when you look out and you see the landscape dying. I don't know what my fellow ranchers, well, I do know what they're doing. I know they're quitting. And they're losing their land and their livelihoods. And of course, my ace up my sleeve is that I have a wind farm which allows me to gain an additional track of revenue in spite of a drought. Wind is my best cash crop in a drought because wind blows even during a drought.
So Pete, talk to me about the history of this ranch. How long have you been here?
My great-grandfather founded this ranch in 1888. This is where he spent his final years. He built this house as a 70-year-old just 5 years before he died.
This very house?
This very house, built 90 years ago by him. So I'm living in my great-grandfather's home, and it's sacred ground.
Pete says that at first, people were skeptical of his wind turbines. But a few years after he put them up, the whole state got behind wind energy in a big way. Kansas passed a law requiring that 20% of all electricity come from renewables by 2020. Now, more than half the states in the country have similar laws. They're known as renewable energy standards. And it's thanks in part to these laws that in 2012, wind and solar in the US grew faster than any other energy source, faster than coal or even natural gas. Kansas now has enough turbines to power nearly 1 million homes. And it's not just lefties who are happy about this. Kansas's Republican governor, one of the most conservative in the country, is a huge supporter.
If we do this right,
we will see the development of a renewable energy corridor throughout the state of Kansas that will provide jobs for rural Kansas and clean energy for the world. I want Kansas to not only be known as the wheat state, but also the renewable state, and we can do it.
But not everyone is happy about all the growth in renewables. And some groups are working very hard to convince people that wind and solar are a bad bet.
We are at the World Series of Poker in the Rio Hotel and Casino. Probably about 2,000 players, mostly poker professionals, a few amateurs like myself. The game, it's so complex. There's patience, self-control, self-discipline. Then it's really important to be able to read people, understanding, who they are, how they're playing. And for my job as an analyst for energy and environment issues and policy, like I would at the poker table, I need to know all the data, I need to know all the studies, I need to discern what each piece of data or study means, fit it into the overall picture.
The mere notion that climate is changing does not mean A, that we're facing a crisis, or B, that we need to do something about it.
James Taylor spends much of his time on the road.
Good morning.
Going from state to state to state, trying to shut down any government efforts to promote renewables.
I've been to most of the state capitals to meet with legislators or state officials or to testify.
For today's hearings, would you prefer that I emphasize more the economics, more the environmental issues?
Emphasize the economic side. I don't think we're going to win the environmental argument.
These are where the battles are fought regarding global warming and all sorts of other issues.
The objective fact is that renewable power is substantially more expensive than conventional power. Natural gas, regarding the 6 principal pollutants tracked by EPA, natural gas cuts those pollutants by 90+%. It's essentially an emissions-free power source.
You are almost a wholly owned subsidiary of ExxonMobil, are you not? Well, that's what the global warming alarmists of the world would like you to believe.
Taylor seems to be part of a vocal minority. I find a Gallup poll saying that 3 out of 4 Americans want the country to push harder on wind and solar. Why is Taylor so intent on stopping that?
You'll win them back, don't worry. Trust me.
Who is this guy?
Keep an eye out for golfers. Hopefully they're sending them off the other way. I don't want to get hit in the back of the head.
It'll take a very weird shot for us to get hit in the back of the head.
I'm a columnist for the New York Times, and I write a lot about climate change. In the last few years, there's been growing excitement about natural gas as a clean alternative to coal and oil. And in cities like Fort Lupton, there's another reason to be excited. All the money that's flowing.
This is an oil and gas operations area. It's within 400 feet, 300 feet of residential homes on the golf course.
No complaints, no problems. This is the way it is, and people are okay with that.
If there were any complaints, I can guarantee you that they'd be calling the mayor. So I would be able to, I'd be hear that. Yeah. When I first got elected, we were having foreclosures left and right, just like it was across the country.
2008, 2009.
Yeah. And when I got in, the oil and gas came. And when that came, we started adding jobs. And so it made a huge difference. I mean, everybody's up at least 20% in their business, 20 to 30%. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas.
Just a few years ago, America's energy future looked uncertain. Then fracking came along. It's an intensive process where millions of gallons of water and chemicals are injected underground to break up the rock and free countless tiny pockets of natural gas. For the first time, fracking made it possible to extract the gas from a type of rock called shale. Around the same time, massive new shale formations were discovered. Suddenly, America had a new domestic energy source, worth more than $10 trillion. Soon, we are fracking at an almost inconceivable rate, drilling more than 35,000 new wells a year. I've heard lots of complaints about fracking. Water catching on fire, toxic chemicals, even earthquakes. But to me, it seemed like maybe the pros outweighed the cons. Natural gas, I learned, produces just half as much carbon dioxide as coal. And when it comes to climate change, that's a big difference. But not far from the natural gas fields of Fort Lupton, a scientist was making a surprising discovery that would challenge the conventional wisdom about natural gas.
We started doing measurements in the Denver Basin, north of Denver, in 2008. We had equipped a tower with instruments to measure methane, carbon dioxide, and a few other gases. And we noticed interesting readings. We had a signal there we had never seen before.
Dramatic.
Yeah, very.
In 2008, Gabby Patron, a top government scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, couldn't believe what she was seeing. High levels of methane, a greenhouse gas up to 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide.
Enhanced methane, propane, butane, almost in every sample. Methane is a strong greenhouse gas. And I had never seen these kind of measurements. So we're like, okay, let's try to understand better what this tower is telling us. And we started driving around.
Patron needed to find out where the methane was coming from, so she turned this old van into a high-tech mobile methane detector. Soon, she was crisscrossing vast stretches of northeastern Colorado, taking thousands of measurements.
Clear? So we're taking.
She thought the methane might be coming from landfills or the 2.6 million cows in the area. But the source turned out to be something she didn't expect.
Methane is right there. But look at these levels. There's no questioning where the methane is coming from.
It's natural gas, okay.
Definitely. We saw a lot of emitters in these oil and gas fields. Every well pad had some kind of signature.
What she was finding was alarming, but was enough methane leaking to make it a serious problem? To find out, she needed more data.
James Taylor is a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute, a libertarian think tank. They promote right-wing views on all kinds of issues, but what they're really famous for is denying man-made climate change. Right now, Taylor's focus is trying to repeal renewable energy laws all over the country. But how does someone like him influence legislation in dozens of states? I find out Taylor is working with a powerful group called the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. The name sounds dull, but ALEC's members have included some of the biggest fossil fuel companies in the world, as well as thousands of mostly Republican state legislators. Together, behind closed doors, they write bills that the legislators then take home to their individual states and try to get passed. ALEC boasts that more than 100 of its bills become real laws every year. Arizona's harsh immigration law started its life as an ALEC bill. So did the controversial Stand Your Ground law that was enacted in more than 24 states.
And we're going to the state capitol, please.
And then there's the Electricity Freedom Act, co-written by James Taylor. It seeks to repeal renewable energy standards all over the country. Today, he's in Kansas.
Many states are on the verge of rolling back their renewable power mandates. They're very close, especially since the fracking revolution, where we've been able to produce more natural gas. And oftentimes, when one state takes that first step, that enables others to follow. I think Kansas is going to be one of those states that is going to set the tone in the next few years.
And with Heartland and ALEC at his back, Taylor has direct access to lawmakers across the country.
So my friends Dennis Hedke and Forrest Knox here in the Kansas legislature, we share ideas on a frequent basis, and we're meeting together to discuss those issues.
Good to see you again.
Dennis Hedke is the chairman of the House Energy and Environment Committee and a member of ALEC. He's trying to put a stop to Kansas's renewable energy mandate with a bill inspired by Taylor's Electricity Freedom Act.
These renewable power mandates here in Kansas and elsewhere, they're requiring you to dismantle power plants that are in existence. Electricity demand, it's only growing at about 1% per year. So if you're to get to 20% by 2020, it means you have to take out existing perfectly good power facilities in order to build more of the wind and solar to make the 20%.
A lot of folks really just can't handle the truth. That's the way it is, but we've got to try our best.
That's a great point.
Heartland introduces me to ideas and concepts that I wouldn't generate on my own. They have studied the issues in significant detail, and so they make recommendations to policymakers like myself. So that's the value to me, is it saves me time, big savings of time.
Anything I can do to help in terms of providing information or reaching out to people, just let me know. Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if forces succeed in rolling back the renewable energy standard, what does that mean for wind farmers?
The rollback would have huge effect on farmers and ranchers who then would no longer have the opportunity that I had to have a wind farm on their property. They have a drought, they have no other option. They're just done.
Around the same time that Gabby Patron was driving her van across Colorado, another scientist at Cornell University in New York was starting an investigation of his own.
Of course, we want to make sure that we're accounting for all the methane that might be flowing into the volume over that area.
Tony Ingraffia is a professor of structural engineering and an expert in rock fracture mechanics. He spent many years consulting for the oil and gas industry, but now he's one of the industry's biggest critics. It all started a few years ago when he decided to take a closer look at what happens to natural gas when it leaks into the air.
Natural gas is essentially methane, CH4, the simplest of all of the hydrocarbons. It's colorless, it's odorless, it's tasteless. Methane, when it's burned, produces less carbon dioxide per unit of energy produced than coal or oil.
It's less dirty.
Less dirty
Okay.
than coal or oil, by far. No question about that. But the problem with methane is that if it gets into the atmosphere without being burned, it becomes a very potent greenhouse gas, worse than carbon dioxide, by far.
How many times worse?
Ask this question. I put a pound of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I put a pound of methane into the atmosphere. If you wait 20 years, methane is anywhere from 72 and 105 times more potent than carbon dioxide.
Wow.
So you'd have to leak 80 pounds of carbon dioxide to do the same harm as 1 pound of methane.
It makes for a thicker blanket than an
Exactly.
equivalent amount of
Yes.
carbon dioxide.
Makes the green
Okay.
makes the Earth's atmosphere a better greenhouse. Therefore, we have to make sure we don't leak very much methane.
Any leaks make natural gas less clean than advertised, and the more it leaks, the dirtier it gets. The question is, how much methane can leak before natural gas starts to get as bad as coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel? Most experts say the threshold is about 3%. As long as no more than 3% of the natural gas we produce ends up leaking into the atmosphere, it's not necessarily good, but it's still better than coal. Ingraffia and his team wanted to collect all the data they could get their hands on to estimate just how much methane was leaking across the entire country.
And over a period of 2 years, we gathered the information we could from the EPA, from the Department of Energy, from industry sources. We pick up the phone and call people at gas companies and oil companies and ask them. And in most cases, they were quite willing to say, yeah, here's the information, here's the data.
No one had pieced all this together before, and what they found looked like very bad news.
We published our paper and we said, look, we concluded that as an upper bound, 7.9% of all the gas produced by a shale gas well during its lifetime would not get burned, but would get emitted. At the lower end, we said about 3.6%. That's the range. It could be this much. But even if it's only this much, natural gas is not any better than coal or oil. And if it's this much, it's way worse.
Even at the low end of the range, the news was bad.
Yes. But I emphasize, we weren't going out and measuring anything. We don't have the resources to do that.
You were really guessing at the amount of methane that was leaking. You really didn't know at that time.
We really didn't know, but I object to the word guess. We were using best available scientific estimation methods to estimate, but we didn't know. We don't know now. No one knows.
Even so, the natural gas industry maintains that the leak rate is only about 1%. And they didn't take kindly to Ingrafia's results.
As I investigate the future of wind and solar power in America, I'm realizing that many of the biggest decisions aren't made in Washington, D.C. They're made in state houses, like this one. This is where James Taylor has been focusing his energy, trying to convince local lawmakers that renewable energy is too expensive. Today, I'm meeting Kimberly Swati. She's a consultant for the wind industry here in Kansas, and she's been on the front lines of this local battle.
So one of the biggest things that I hear is that if my state decides to switch to wind or solar, ultimately I'm gonna end up paying for it. My utility bill is gonna go through the roof. Is that true?
We have seen in the last several years, as the utilities have bought more renewable energy and they've integrated onto their system, the price impact has been de minimis, is what they say. 0 to 1.7% impact. So not in Kansas. Your rates will not go up in Kansas.
It's no surprise that Swati would say good things about wind, but a report by the state of Kansas itself backs her up. And while it's true that in some states, renewable energy isn't as cheap as fossil fuels, prices are falling incredibly fast. Wind and solar dropped by more than 50% just between 2008 and 2012. And here in Kansas, wind has also generated tens of millions of dollars for landowners, brought in billions in investment, and helped create over 12,000 jobs.
The forces that are interested in pulling back are primarily external forces.
And who are they?
We've seen organizations like the Heartland Institute has come into Kansas and put out information that is misleading about the cost of wind and renewables.
And what is it that they're saying about the cost of renewable?
They're saying that renewable energy costs a lot more than what it really does in Kansas. And I'm 7th generation Kansan, and this is a very important place for me. We have good things happening here right now. And it's very frustrating to see people come in and provide information that's not accurate for our state to try and undermine policies that have absolutely worked for our state.
We'd like to present the facts on various topics, energy and the environment, budget and tax, to people who are influential.
If you are a state legislator here in Colorado, or you have been a state legislator, could you just raise your hand, or there are a few more. It's our privilege to have with us in person the real James Taylor.
Going to a Heartland event feels like entering an alternate universe.
There are hundreds upon hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that show that humans are not causing, global warming is not causing an increase in extreme weather events. Don't let anybody tell you differently.
In reality, the scientific consensus on climate change is effectively unanimous.
It is extremely likely that humans are mostly to blame for temperatures that have been climbing now for decades. How sure are these scientists? They say about 95% certain. And in science, 95% is pretty darn certain.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, brings together thousands of scientists from more than 50 countries. Their latest report might be the most comprehensive scientific assessment in history, and its conclusions are dire. But to challenge the findings of the IPCC, Heartland and others set up their own group, the NIPCC.
We're producing, look for it, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, the updated report, Climate Change Reconsidered, explaining what's going on.
Heartland even came up with a billboard campaign in 2012 over a busy Chicago highway that equated people who believe in global warming with terrorists. I'm starting to wonder, who's behind the Heartland Institute? So I'm heading to California to meet two people who have studied Heartland for years.
I'm on my way to meet with Mark Bowling, a top executive with Southwestern Energy, the 5th largest natural gas producer in the nation. I want to ask him about Dr. Ingrafia's paper, which estimated that more than 3% of all the natural gas produced in the U.S. is leaking.
We are not going to let those profits go up in the air. So that's part. I'm not sure whether that's the real answer to your question, but it's from our perspective. From industry's perspective, we said, well, of course it can't be that high. We'd be fired if we allowed our leak rate to be that high.
It's obviously a touchy subject because he's the only industry official who would agree to talk on camera. And he wants to show me how preventing leaks is just smart business.
That's where we capture all of the gas from the minute that it comes back from a hydraulic fracturing flowback and put it right into the sales line.
Several years ago, Southwestern started doing what it called green completions to capture gases, including methane, that would otherwise escape into the air.
The old way we used to do it, like this. We would vent probably 16 million cubic feet of gas on average from each well that we are now capturing. Multiply that by the amount of money you make per 1,000 cubic feet, it pays for itself.
So you're making money on it because you're selling the 16 million cubic feet that you're capturing from
Absolutely.
Air combined with fresh snow, and you kind of had the...
Bowling says Ingrafia's research just focused on the dirtiest wells.
When I looked at some of the assumptions they used to come up with their numbers, and I go, oh, well, the study lost credibility with me in that regard. And the kind of work that was put into it wasn't what it should be to come out and make those statements like, hey, natural gas is dirtier than coal. That just didn't seem right to me.
After talking to Bowling, I try to find out how many other companies are actually doing green completions. No one seems to know, not even the government. Nevertheless, when it comes to methane leaks, the government more or less agrees with the industry estimates. The Environmental Protection Agency says the leak rate is just 1.5%. Well below the 3% threshold. I wanted to find out how they get that number, but for some reason the EPA declined to talk to me on camera. But then I found a former EPA official who was willing to talk, and he explained how the agency comes up with its estimates, which are officially called emission inventories.
I worked 38 years with EPA and actually formulated the techniques for developing emission inventories. I was responsible for them right from the start. They're of necessity guesses.
That's because the EPA doesn't do comprehensive measurements. As crazy as it sounds, when the EPA says methane emissions are going down in the US, they're pretty much taking the gas industry's word for it.
All these emission inventories, by the way, are derived from industry-supported data.
So when EPA publishes estimates of methane, of leaks of methane, that data is coming from industry.
Right.
Is it all independently verified?
No. You know, Mark, in my experience, developing and maintaining emission inventories nationally for many years, every time we looked further, we found more emissions. And every time there was some sort of large growth in a particular industry, there were unforeseen emissions. And we're in the same situation today, certainly with the gas drilling that's going on now. The extensiveness of it is unbelievable.
But EPA's recently lowered their estimate of methane leak rate.
Well, where did the data come from? The data came from the industry.
Right.
Now, that's like Farmer John sends the fox out to say, how many chickens do I have? And he comes back and says, you got 10 less chickens this year than you had last year.
Yes.
It seemed like everyone was guessing about methane leaks. But in Colorado, Gabby Patron's research was finally yielding some concrete results.
I've come to California to meet with Lisa Graves, the executive director for the Center for Media and Democracy, and Brendan DeMille, who runs an investigative website called Desmog Blog. They've made it their business to learn as much as possible about the Heartland Institute and other groups that deny climate change.
Heartland has this storied history of attacking climate change. They've sort of molded their position to fit the times. Originally, they started out as outright deniers, saying it's not happening, it's a hoax. When the science was clear, they sort of shifted to, well, if it's happening, it's not that big of a deal, to actually, it might be good for us, it might be beneficial. And that's where James Taylor really, his position is that global warming will be beneficial for humans.
The scientific evidence is really against them, but they say things so boldly and stridently that it makes some people believe that they must be telling the truth.
So who are Heartland supporters? Where do they get their funding?
Well, there's a number of things we know about the Heartland's funding and some that we don't, because as of 2007, they don't disclose their donors.
One thing they do know is that Heartland is just a small part of a vast climate denial network, with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. Through a combination of public tax records and leaked internal documents, a lot of the money has been tracked back to two major sources. ExxonMobil, the world's largest oil company, gave at least $27.4 million to climate denial groups between 1998 and 2010, including hundreds of thousands of dollars to Heartland. And fossil fuel billionaires Charles and David Koch, who own Koch Industries, have funneled more than $72 million to the cause through a dizzying array of foundations and front groups. But recently, the money trail has gone cold.
Foundations or companies that gave money directly are now, through this mechanism called Donors Trust and the Donors Capital Fund, able to shield their donors.
Which makes it harder for the public to put pressure on those funders to not support.
How do you hold someone accountable if you don't know who they are?
Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund act as middlemen between wealthy donors and groups they want to secretly fund. The donors are able to remain anonymous. Much of Heartland's funding now comes from a single anonymous donor. And with the help of Donors Trust, more money is pouring into climate denial than ever before. A staggering $558 million just between 2003 and 2010. And Brendan and Lisa tell me that climate change isn't the only issue where Heartland has been on the wrong side of science.
One of the things we've seen with Heartland and with the other groups is a real effort to muddy the waters, and that's right out of the tobacco company's big PR playbook.
In 1969, a tobacco executive wrote a memo in which he said that doubt is our product. If they were going to confuse the public, they needed to suggest to them that there's no link between tobacco and cancer. So we're going to sell this idea that there's confusion among scientists and continue to perpetuate doubt in the public mind. And Heartland was one of the key players in that.
In the 90s, with funding from Philip Morris, Heartland tried to discredit the science linking secondhand smoke to cancer. In a fundraising letter, Heartland's president boasted about how valuable the organization was to tobacco companies. And many of the same scientists now denying climate change got their start defending cigarettes. Brennan, can you tell us more about who James Taylor is?
Sure. So James Taylor, his expertise is in the law. He's a lawyer. He's a great talker. He's a very personable guy. But it's kind of shocking to me that anyone would rely on a lawyer to give them advice about science matters. It's kind of like asking your dentist what to do about your heart condition. He might have some interesting things to say about it, but he's probably not the specialist you should be listening to.
Ever since I started following this battle over renewables, I've wanted to meet James Taylor, face to face. I get my chance when he agrees to meet in New York.
After more than 2 years driving around collecting samples, Gabby Patron had a wealth of data showing leaks throughout the entire natural gas system in the Denver Basin. What'd you do with that information? Where did that go?
We wrote a paper and we estimated at the time that on average 4% of the gas that was extracted from the ground ended up in the atmosphere instead of in the pipeline.
You're showing a leak rate that's much, much higher than EPA estimates and 4 times as high, a minimum of 4 times as high as what the industry says there is.
That's right.
But this is real information produced
Right.
by scientists using real instruments.
And peer-reviewed.
Peer-reviewed, impartial, etc. You present this information to the industry and they say what?
They have a lot of questions. I don't think that everybody's happy with what we found.
Here was an independent study produced by top government scientists suggesting that, at least in the Denver Basin, natural gas is far from clean. Not surprisingly, the industry argued that Patron's results were just an outlier, a single snapshot of a vast natural gas system.
That's where we're going. It's making measurements every 1 second.
Practically, as soon as we started the lever and all it went up.
Yeah, it's starting to go up.
The Uinta Basin in eastern Utah is home to thousands of natural gas and oil wells, and not much else. I'm here with a team from Picaro, a company that's working on cutting-edge technology for measuring methane emissions. Normally, these guys are hired by the gas companies themselves to find and fix leaks. This time, though, they're heading out on their own dime. They want to know if the methane problem could possibly be as bad as Patron's numbers suggest. And to find out, they brought the big guns, equipment that's 1,000 times more sensitive than what most companies use to detect methane.
The blue dots are natural gas wells?
Yes, or natural gas facilities of one type or another.
It's insane. We're driving down this road, and we took that right turn, and then within minutes, at first it doubled, now it's
sitting
close
at
to triple
it. Yeah, that's correct.
It takes 2 weeks to fully cover the area. They find leaks everywhere. There's so much gas in the air that methane readings are sky high over the entire 700 square mile basin. I was surprised by what Gabby Patron showed me in Colorado. It's starting to look like Utah is even worse.
What is your point of view? Where do you stand on climate change?
Well, we know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. If you add more to the atmosphere, you're going to get some global warming. So it's human nature to see change and fear change. But the best evidence out there, the best scientific evidence and data show that the moderate warming that is occurring is beneficial to human welfare, as it always has been throughout human history.
Can you talk to me about who supports you and the Heartland Institute? Who your funders are?
Yeah, first of all, working on policy issues, I make it a point not to know. I don't want that to influence, what I write and think. And even if I wanted to know, the Heartland Institute prevents me from knowing it.
You don't know who your funders are?
I have a general idea of some, oftentimes because some global warming activists or people that don't like the Heartland Institute, they'll, assert that, we receive money from this group or that. In general terms, what I do know is that the vast majority of our funding comes from private individuals and from foundations. And if you look at corporations that have a stake in the energy debate, especially fossil fuel companies, that would be a very small percentage.
Why is this something worth fighting? Why is renewable energy bad?
Yeah. People like to talk about carbon dioxide and global warming, but they don't talk about the 1.4 million birds and bats, including many endangered species, that are killed each year by wind turbines. Also, according to the wind energy industry itself, it requires 300 to 600 square miles of wind turbines to replace a single conventional power plant.
Don't we need those things to help us jumpstart a new economy or a new solution to fighting a modern problem like climate change?
Well, if global warming were a very serious problem, then certainly we would be wise to look into that. But the science indicates that it's not a very serious problem.
But James, I'm really confused because 97% of climate scientists say that it's real. and that it's a problem, and that it's man-made. And you, with all due respect, you're a lawyer, right?
I'm a lawyer by training. I don't
You're a
practice.
lawyer by training, but you're not a scientist by training.
Well, I'm a scientist by training as well.
You're a scientist.
I successfully completed Ivy League atmospheric science courses, so I'm a scientist by training.
Okay.
But let's get to your question.
Well, my question is I'm confused because there's over here kind of a mountain of evidence that suggests it's a problem, it's man-made, people will suffer. So why focus on the smaller evidence versus the mounting evidence?
Well, I think your premise is wrong. In fact, more than 31,000 scientists signed on to a letter, a summary of the science, explaining why global warming is not a human-caused crisis.
That letter you're talking about, that's the Oregon petition?
Yes, indeed.
I'd heard about this from Brendan and Lisa in LA.
The Oregon petition.
Right.
It's one of the original sort of efforts by the denial industry to suggest that they had thousands of scientists on their side that would say that global warming is not a problem.
Right.
But then as you look through those lists, there were fictitious names.
Everyone from Star Wars characters to a member of the Spice Girls have shown up on that list.
There certainly are some scientists. They're meteorologists, they're geologists, they're biologists, certainly people with expertise in their area, but they're far outside their specialization. Most of these people, they're not climate scientists.
There was a name on it that was one of the Spice Girls.
Who told you
There
that?
were names
You're getting
on
bad
it. There were
information,
names
America.
on it like.
If you look at the petition itself, if you contact the scientists who put it together, they will present documentation. They have it on their website. More than 31,000 scientists have signed it, and it's documented. It's documented.
After meeting James, I did some more research. His science training consists of a few undergraduate courses he took over 25 years ago. As for the Oregon petition, it turns out anyone with an undergraduate science degree can add their name. The website brags about the number of signatures, but less than 1% even claim to have an expertise in climate science. The whole thing seems kind of ridiculous to me. But with all the money pouring in, the denial campaign seems hard to counter. And I wonder how all this will play out in Kansas, where the vote on renewable energy is about to happen.
When we got to Utah, I was shocked. I have never, and I have done measurements all over the world. I have never seen a situation ever over hundreds of square miles. The number of leaks in Uinta is staggering.
A few weeks after our trip to Utah, Eric Crossan from Picaro is analyzing the data we collected. What he's finding is hard to fathom.
We did a back-of-the-envelope calculation and came to the conclusion that the leak rate coming out of the Uinta Basin was about 11%.
Utah, in other words, is even worse than Colorado. And on the heels of Picaro's findings, another group of NOAA scientists looks at methane emissions coming from a mixture of oil and gas wells in the Los Angeles basin. Their number? 17%.
We hear industry say, there's just not that much in the way of leaks. Maybe we're losing 1%. It's not that high. It's not that big a problem. What do you say to that?
They're wrong. They're just flat out wrong in terms of what these emissions are. The EPA is flat out wrong as well. But it's like so many other inaccuracies in life. If you repeat them often enough, and if you repeat them loud enough, and you defend them vociferously, then that kind of becomes accepted as truth.
Los Angeles Basin, up to 17%. Now, granted, that's one basin. Utah was another basin. Colorado was another basin. But these basins are starting to line up. All the data comes out so far. Doesn't bode well for the final answer, looking like it's way low, like the industry says, oh, less than 1%. Impossible. Absolutely impossible.
NOAA measured, got levels of 17% in the Los Angeles basin. You know, it takes a lot of 1% emissions to bring that average back down.
I can tell you that I looked at the studies that NOAA did, and I know something about the Picaro instrumentation. And I think some of those numbers, they certainly concern me. How could you say that methane emission rate was 1.5%? Very, very difficult to get there from here for that.
After what I've seen in working on this story for months, a 1% leak rate industry-wide, countrywide, that really seems laughable.
No question there's work to be done, but we can all waste our time about, is it 4%, is it 8%, is it 1%, or we can all just say, I don't care what anyone thinks it is, let's go out and fix the problem.
It's nice to hear someone from the industry at least acknowledge there's a problem. President Obama has acknowledged it too and promised to study it. And in Colorado, the Environmental Defense Fund successfully campaigned for tougher regulations on methane leaks. But actually fixing the problem might not be that easy. Some say technology like the kind I saw at Mark Bowling's facility is the answer. And a study last year by the Environmental Defense Fund showed that these so-called green completions can help quite a bit. But in Colorado, where more and more wells are doing green completions, Gabby Patron still hasn't seen methane emissions go down. Then I started thinking about all the places across the country where gas can leak. Not just the hundreds of thousands of wells, but a pipeline system 1.5 million miles long, with tens of thousands of compressor stations, countless valves, and corroded pipes running under towns and cities everywhere. Even under the very city where the future of natural gas will be decided.
Check these first.
This one, we can smell it.
Yeah, you can smell it just walking up. Oh, yeah.
I think it's saturating my instrument.
11%. That's a dangerous concentration.
Yeah,
if that sparked, that would blow up.
Rob Jackson is a scientist with Duke University. He's been using Picara technology to find methane leaks in cities. He just finished a study in Boston where he found thousands of them. And now he's finding the same thing here.
This is a partial map of the city. The red is all the road miles in the city. The yellow are the leaks. And you literally have thousands of very small leaks spread out all across the city. It's death by 1,000 cuts. So that's 45% gas. That's almost pure methane coming out of the ground. There's so much methane there that you actually couldn't light that because there's not enough oxygen. Not that that's much consolation.
There's a lot more we still don't know. But from everything I've seen, it seems like right now natural gas could be making our climate problem worse rather than better. I think we need to ask ourselves if that's a risk worth taking, because the natural gas boom in this country is just getting started.
The bill that would dismantle Kansas's clean energy law is up for a vote today. And Pete Farrell is on his way to listen in.
In April 2009, this legislature passed mandates to, quote, protect, end quote, U.S. citizens from the dangers of a colorless, odorless, tasteless, and I submit to you, harmless gas known as CO2. The existing mandates are why we're here today.
Political winds shift, the composition of the legislature shifts, and maybe it shifts because of bad decisions that were made before.
This is about generations of Kansans to come.
If the vote is a yes, Kansas's renewable energy law will be repealed.
I'm in support of this amendment.
I just cannot support this bill.
What are we doing here? What are we doing? I will move forward this motion.
This is starting to get a little ridiculous.
I will not support this, and I do question why we're just playing with numbers.
I disagree. And so I would suggest that this legislation does advance reasonable policy for the citizens of Kansas. All right, we'll call for a vote on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay.
No.
Chair is in doubt. We'll call for a raise of hands to clarify the vote. All in favor, raise your right hand, please. Showing 9. Okay, all opposed? 9-10, the motion fails. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
We survived by one vote. One vote kept us from destroying the renewable energy standard in Kansas. So it wasn't like it was a slam dunk or anything.
And do they really think that that's in the best interest of the people in Kansas?
No, I don't think they think it's in the best interest in the people of Kansas. I think they think it's the best interest of powerful corporations.
America, this is absolutely my favorite spot. Not only is this where the ashes of my parents and my sister and loved ones are, but it's the best view of the world, in my opinion. I mean,
beautiful.
We've got everything up here. We've got the most gorgeous tall grass prairie in the world, and we have a state-of-the-art wind farm as a backdrop.
But I heard you say that you think they're beautiful, but because of what they symbolize.
Yeah, what they represent. The ability to generate electricity without putting carbon in the air. That's always been a central point for me. You know, we're going to run out of oil and coal. Do we want a hard landing or a soft landing? And I think moving to renewables provides a soft landing for us.
In the end, despite the efforts of Heartland, ALEC, and others, not a single state voted to repeal its clean energy law in 2013. Instead, 4 states actually increased their goals for renewables. But Taylor is planning to continue the fight.
I'm very optimistic. I'm very pleased with the way events have been unfolding in the states. Sure, I would like to have had some renewable power mandates rolled back by now. When I say by now, it's only been a couple of years that we've really turned the momentum. But I really think that I have a strong hand in terms of what I'm advocating in the climate debate. And I'm very comfortable in my own skin in that debate, just like I am at the poker table.